Hi students! So we're going to pick up where we left off the last time we saw each other. With this video, we're going to start with a review of the definition of life chances, our more detailed definition of life chances than the one that you will see in your reading assignment in the textbook. In Chapter 7, on the first or second page of the chapter, you will see a definition of life chances there. It is a correct definition of life chances that our textbook author has provided for us. But in our class discussions and in what you are going to be required to do in your project that you're going to take home over the course of this unit and complete for a grade, you are going to need to be able to understand some of the terminology from this unit on a deeper level so that you can evaluate scenarios, evaluate situations having to do with the different types of poverty that we're going to review in this lesson, and also human development index issues, which we will review in a future assignment, a future chapter. So, you see on the board behind me an expanded definition of life chances from our class discussion the last time we saw each other face to face. We took the life chances definition from Chapter 7 and we broke it down into a couple of different components here. And we did this because it's going to be easier, in my opinion, the way I'm teaching you this, it's going to be easier for you to evaluate the scenarios about the different impoverished situations you're going to look at for your project. It'll be easier for you to evaluate them if you have a more detailed or broken down definition of life chances. So that's why we've written it this way. You will notice differences between this definition and the one that's in Chapter 7 in your reading assignment. However, they should say the same thing. Ours is just a little bit more detailed. We've broken it down just a little bit more into two different types of things. Life chances are opportunities that people have in life for two different types of things. The first one is subsistence. You will remember we talked about this word the last time we saw each other. Subsistence is not a specific word to sociology. It is a good college level vocabulary word, however. To subsist simply means to survive from day to day. And so life chances include opportunities people have in life to be able to survive from day to day. What do we need to survive from day to day? Not an unlimited data plan, no matter how much my niece said she was just going to die without one. No, we don't need that unlimited data plan. What we need to subsist every day is food, potable water. Remember, the word potable means we can drink it. Not just any old water will do. We don't want water that's going to make us sick. We want water that is drinkable. That's what potable means. Drinkable water. Shelter, which can vary from place to place. Clothing can be considered shelter also. And then, of course, air. We don't have to pay for that yet. Don't give anybody any ideas about having to pay for that. However, air quality is different based upon your geographic location, and that can happen, that can work into, or that can come into some of the discrimination or oppression issues that we're going to talk about when we look at demographics and locations and things like that in future chapters. Okay, so subsistence is only one part of life chances. The second part is opportunities for advancement or comfort in life. It sure is nice to have running water and heat and air conditioning and electricity, and it's wonderful to have that, but it's not necessary to have that just for basic subsistence. It makes life easier. It gives you better mental and physical well-being if you have these kinds of things. So that contributes to your advancement and your comfort. If you are going to achieve a status of higher education, the more creature comforts you have, the more life chances for comfort that you have, the more life chances for advancement you're going to be able to take advantage of. The more education you have, the more jobs you can have, the more transportation, the wider the area you can look. Healthcare is something that also contributes to your ability to work on advancement opportunities and your ability to have comfort in life. These things are life chances, subsistence and advancement and comfort opportunities. These are life chances that are not distributed equally among all members of the population everywhere. Because they're not distributed equally, this is a topic that goes directly to our social stratification theme for this entire unit. And because we are going to need to use this concept, life chances, to evaluate different types of poverty that we're going to study in Chapter 7 and Chapter 8, it is going to be helpful for you to break this definition down into two pieces, because these two pieces will really help you understand at least two of the three types of poverty that you are going to be asked to evaluate, to understand and evaluate and analyze situations to determine whether a description is talking about this type of poverty or another type of poverty or another. So that's how your project, your take-home project, is going to be organized. It's going to be a whole bunch of scenarios, and each scenario is going to describe a different situation in life, a different situation in a different life, and you're going to have to take your knowledge about life chances, take your knowledge about the type of poverty that we are about to investigate, and also take your knowledge about human development index issues that we won't cover until we get to Chapter 8 topics. You're going to have to take all that information and combine it and use your knowledge to analyze situations, analyze scenarios and descriptions about life, not only in our country, but all around the world. Okay, so that is what this unit is going to ask you to do for that project. Okay, so life chances is not the only concept that you're going to need to know very thoroughly and be able to apply to the different scenarios I described to you a minute ago. But these different concepts having to do with poverty that you'll read about, some of them come from Chapter 7 and some of them come from Chapter 8. These different concepts of poverty are also one of the main focuses of your take-home project and understanding of this unit in general, that of course you're going to have a unit test on at the end when it's all finished. Now, one thing that I want you to notice about your textbook and about what I have on the board here behind me, I want you to notice that I do not have the word poverty by itself without an adjective in front of it or without it being part of a longer phrase. I don't have the word poverty by itself defined up here. In sociology, you will not be able to find a book or a textbook author that just defines poverty by itself. You'll have to look in the dictionary for that. The dictionary can give you a definition of what poverty means, but that's not a sociological definition. In order for us to take a concept like poverty or an impoverished situation, in order for us to take a concept like that, in sociology, we have to put a framework or we have to put a context around it that gives us sort of a baseline to measure and to evaluate different situations. So one thing that you will find in our textbook in Chapter 7 is a discussion about the official poverty line. Now, I have paraphrased the definition of official poverty line on the board here. You should find it in your textbook, and you can make notes of how I have paraphrased it and compared to what your textbook author says. It's important for you to be able to recognize a proper definition of this, but you don't have to memorize the definition word for word mine or word for word the textbook authors. You have to be able to express the correct definition in your own words in order to be able to explain this well. Okay, so let's look first at what I have up here, official poverty line. There is a long, really ugly equation that goes along with the official poverty line. This is a government term. This is a term that on the federal level or the state or the local level in government, people calculate what the official poverty line is all the time because they try to keep track about prices and costs of things. So the official poverty line is a dollar amount. It's going to be a dollar amount, but please notice that this definition does not give you what that specific dollar amount is, because prices change from one location to the next. If a 2-bedroom apartment in Benton, Arkansas is $850 a month, a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City might be $4,800 a month. So you cannot give just one particular amount. You can't calculate just one particular amount of money and say, oh, all across the United States, all across, here's the amount, $20,000. That's the amount that declares poverty for, a particular group of people all across the United States, no matter where you are. Because prices are different, not just for rent, like in the example that I gave you, but for food, for transportation, for insurance, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The prices and the cost of living, we call it, the cost of living that we're going to talk about a lot in class together, the cost of living changes from place to place. And therefore, the amount of money that is necessary to keep a family at a subsistence level, here's that word again, that college level word we talked about. The amount of money that's necessary to keep a family at a subsistence level is different from one place to the next. It's very different from one place to the next. So you will not see the word poverty by itself defined. You won't see it. You will see it as part of a phrase like this, or you will see adjectives that qualify the type of poverty that we are talking about in our sociology textbook, in our sociology lessons. Okay, so in the United States, we have something called the official poverty line. We use this measurement to determine all kinds of, let me back up. We use that measurement to determine whether you and the people who depend on you are qualified for certain social safety nets that make it easier for you to live at or above a subsistence level. That is not entirely unique. That process is not entirely unique to the United States. Many cultures around the world have kind of checks and balances, if you'll let me use that phrase, checks and balances to make sure that people are taken care of as far as their subsistence needs. So, in other words, let me use the word life chances in a sentence here that relates it to what we're saying here in this in this official poverty line definition. So, in the United States, government officials regularly calculate prices and they plug in numbers into this long equation to calculate what is the minimum amount of money, what's the minimum amount of money necessary for a family of a certain number of people to subsist in the area where they're located. In other words, what is a family of four's life chances for subsistence in the particular place where they live? And so we use this number as a guideline. Does this particular family need help? Do they need a housing voucher? Do they need a SNAP card? Do they need WIC? What kind do they need? Our Kids First? What are these kinds of measurements? What sorts of social safety nets can we give them so that they don't have to just subsist? Because that's not comforting. That's not, you don't have opportunities for advancement if you're worried constantly. You don't have mental well-being if you're worried constantly that you're just at a subsistence level. So we definitely, in this country, we want you to absolutely be able to subsist, but we want you to have more than that too, because if you don't have comfort, life chances for comfort, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of as many life chances for advancement that might come your way because you're preoccupied, worried, depressed, fatalistic, any kind of negative descriptor that you can think of because your subsistence level is at stake. So the official poverty line is an important measurement that is used for a lot of leveling mechanisms, a lot of social service and subsidized living stipends for people who find themselves at or close to the official poverty line in a particular place where they live. But that is not a process, that is not a norm that occurs across the board all over the world. We know that norms are different from place to place. Macro level norms and social facts are different from place to place. So what we do in the United States culture is not necessarily the same thing that happens in the country of Liberia, for instance, which is one of the videos that you're going to watch to get an example of these different kinds of poverty that you're going to have to make a comparison of. Okay, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let me jump back to these different types of poverty. Okay. So again, you don't see the word poverty by itself, you see it with an adjective in front of it. I don't have the definitions written here on the board. You do that when I'm giving them to you orally. You can stop the video, and I'm sure I'll have a wonderful freeze frame expression on my face. You can make a meme about it later and make fun of me. But anyway, the different types of poverty are written here. And the knowledge about these different types of poverty is something that you are going to have to know very, very thoroughly in order for you to evaluate those scenarios on your project that you're going to do for this unit, okay? So these types of poverty are key. Knowledge about them are key for success on that project. Okay, so we have 3 types of poverty. So, absolute poverty is a life-threatening condition. It's a life-threatening condition, okay? Absolute poverty is the risk that you will not be able to subsist. If you look back at the life chances definition, life chances has 2 types of opportunities. Opportunities for subsistence, opportunities for advancement. If you are living in absolute poverty conditions, forget about the opportunities for advancement and comfort, forget. Because you don't even have regular access to or control over subsistence level supplies so that you can comfortably go to sleep at night and be confident that you're going to wake the next morning. Or if you have people dependent upon you for their subsistence needs, absolute poverty includes whether you are able to provide the dependents that you have with a subsistence level. So if you do not have appropriate shelter that can protect you from the elements so that you survive, if you don't have appropriate food supply that can give you enough nutrients so that you can keep a baby alive, or so you can keep yourself alive, or you have a good enough immune system to fight diseases naturally. If you don't have enough food, you're going to die. Potable water is huge here. We're really spoiled, in my opinion. We're really spoiled in our life situation because we have life chances for all kinds of potable water. Most of us won't even go to the water fountain right beside the public restroom out here at school. Most of us won't even drink out of that. Instead, we'll pay $1.25, $1.50. I don't even know how much it is now when you go into the cafe and buy one of the Dasani bottled waters or the PTC Culinary School bottled waters. They cost us $1, $1.25, something like that. We would much rather opt for that than even go and drink out of the clean water supply in our public water fountain. Water is one of the main contributors to absolute poverty conditions worldwide. Let me be more specific. Unsafe, unclean, non-potable water is one of the major contributors to absolute poverty conditions worldwide. When we watch the short segment of the video that I mentioned earlier about the country Liberia, you're going to watch a section about a slum that refugees had to just put up with, cardboard and sheet metal and whatever they could find, and they don't have water resources to bathe or to cook or to clean or proper sanitation. And so the water supply that they have to drink is very, very likely contaminated, and it's contaminated with things that give us diarrhea, which is not a very fun thing to talk about, but it's part of the microscale human condition that could be affected by macro scale things like lack of a clean water supply, lack of water resources, lack of things like an infrastructure, which we have in our culture, to maintain water quality. So if your water source is contaminated with some kind of bug or critter that's making you sick and causing you diarrhea, most of you out there know that one of the main dangers of diarrhea is that it dehydrates you. You need more water if you're afflicted with that kind of problem. But if your water supply that you have access to is the main thing that's making you sick, that's causing you dehydration, that is threatening your life and ultimately takes your life, then you're not able to live at a subsistence level. Absolute poverty is life-threatening because, here's a concise definition you can write down. Absolute poverty conditions are those conditions in which you cannot provide yourself or those who depend on you with subsistence level needs. Just subsistence level stuff. Your life chances are not there for subsistence level needs, not on a regular basis. Your life is in danger because you don't have access to those things that we talked about: food, clean water, shelter, air that's going to keep you alive. So you're unable to provide those things to yourself or to those who depend on you. That is what absolute poverty is. It's a leading reason for death worldwide. Absolute poverty conditions. When we get to chapter 8 and we're talking about human development index issues, things like education, things in that second part of that life chances definition, things, opportunities for advancement and comfort, things like education, things like jobs, things like healthcare, those kinds of things are necessary to improve absolute poverty conditions. But it might be hard for us to realize until we see some of this stuff in the video that I'm going to ask you to watch. It might be hard for you to realize how little brain power you can actually put toward getting your education or toward getting a job or something like that if your life is in danger because you don't have subsistence needs met. You don't really have a whole lot of ability to focus on life improvement if you can't even focus on daily survival because it's just not there. So absolute poverty creates a condition that's kind of a catch-22. It's like a stone that's gathering moss. It just kind of snowballs out of control, and it is one of the major problems with loss of life worldwide, absolute poverty conditions. In chapter 8, you'll read about an international organization called the World Bank, and the World Bank is not someplace like Regions National or whatever, Reliance Bank. It's not someplace like that where you actually go and make deposits and you have an account and all this kind of stuff. The World Bank is a repository of information and social climate situations, social justice situations. And the World Bank measures absolute poverty conditions worldwide. And they calculated that if an individual has less than $1 a day available to provide for their subsistence needs, then they are in absolute poverty conditions. $1 a day. $1 for your shelter, $1 for your food, $1 for your potable water. The dollar has to cover all of those things in order for you to be out of the absolute poverty conditions. $1.25. Sorry, I said $1. There's a TV show called $1 a Day, but it's $1.25. It is $1.25 that the World Bank says is absolute poverty conditions. Okay. So think about that for a second. A minute ago, I was talking about how in our culture, most of us won't even drink out of the water fountain. Even though that's perfectly drinkable water, we'll plop down $1.25 for that water bottle instead. What if that's the only resource that you had during the day? Or less than that. I mean, that's the high threshold. If you have $1.26 available, then the World Bank says you're outside of the scope of this absolute poverty condition. So it's something to think about there. Absolute poverty is life-threatening. So when you're doing this take-home exercise that you have, you're going to need to remember that life chances can be broken down into two parts. When we're talking about absolute poverty and life chances, then you don't even get past the very first type of opportunity that's included in the definition of life chances. You don't get past the subsistence level because your life is in danger and you might die. You probably do die. In the video that we watch, we will see, unfortunately, the death that we're talking about, the disease and the death that we're talking about from absolute poverty conditions worldwide. We have absolute poverty in the United States. Absolute poverty certainly exists. People die from starvation. People die from lack of proper water resources. People die from lack of shelter. People might die from, freezing to death or something because they didn't have proper accommodations during the winter, right, in order to protect their fragile body from the cold. And so that's certainly an absolute poverty condition. However, when we go back to this official poverty line calculation that we were talking about, there are many, many, many government and non-government organizations, NGO is what we call that, government and non-government organizations, and Christian and religious, Christian, Muslim, Jewish organizations too, parochial organizations that are in business in order to help prevent absolute poverty conditions in certain places. We have tons of that in the United States, so there's a whole bunch of safety net to prevent absolute poverty conditions. We have homeless shelters and soup kitchens and food banks and, clothing resources that are given out to people in need when they ask for it, and it's spread out all over the place. So it is not entirely out of the question that we would have absolute poverty in the United States. We do. But it's much less likely for us to have absolute poverty in the United States than it is worldwide because we have so many safety nets. We keep a really close watch on this, and we have a lot of safety nets, subsidies, and stipends that are available for people when they come close to this or when they find themselves within this official poverty line. So absolute poverty exists in the United States, but not nearly as commonly as these other two types on our list here, okay? So let's move to the other two types. Pause the video if you need to, go back and review this. Make sure you've got a ton of notes about absolute poverty. I wrote 2 words on the board. That's not enough for your notes. Rewind it, go back, listen to all my talking about absolute poverty, stop the video, write down some stuff, text me with questions, ask me for clarification. You've got to do that because you need to know details about this in order to do well on that project activity that you're going to take home, and that's what I want you to do. I want you to do well, okay? I want you to be successful. So back this video up, make sure you write down a ton of notes about absolute poverty, okay? All right, let's move on to relative poverty. Relative poverty is extremely common in the United States. We have not talked about our socioeconomic categories yet in the United States, but when we see each other again face to face and we start drawing a lot of those ladders with all the steps and the rungs on the ladder, like I discussed in class the other day when we saw each other, we will talk about socioeconomic levels and what your job, what the job availability is, what the income availability is, what the wealth, power, and prestige issues are with each of these different socioeconomic levels. And 2 of the socioeconomic levels in our modern United States class system, 2 of the socioeconomic levels exist pretty much within the definition of relative poverty. Okay? Relative poverty is defined, it's defined like this. Relative poverty is a condition in which you can and do provide yourself and those who are dependent upon you with your subsistence needs. That's taken care of. Relative poverty is not life-threatening because your subsistence needs are taken care of. However, people who live in relative poverty are not able to provide themselves with what we call, look at my air quotes, the average standard of living for the place where they live. Okay? Relative poverty. People are able to provide for their subsistence needs, but they are not able to maintain the average expected standard of living and style of life that people in their area usually enjoy or are usually expected to enjoy. Relative poverty. When we compare that to life chances, think of it this way. If you live in relative poverty, you have life chances solidly for opportunities for subsistence. You solidly have that. You have some, but not very many, not to the expected level. You have some opportunities for advancement and comfort. You probably have electricity. You probably have plumbing and running water. Maybe you don't have TV service all the time. Maybe you have a month-to-month phone plan because you can't always pay for the phone to keep it up. Maybe your car really needs to be replaced, but there's just not money for it. Maybe you buy tires at the used tire store like I did all through college in order just to get by. That's not the average standard of living. Maybe you have to have 4 roommates in a 2-bedroom apartment just to make ends meet. Maybe you have to have 3 jobs and try to juggle childcare and all of this kind of stuff just to make ends meet. So therefore you're not able to take advantage of as many opportunities for advancement or comfort as you would like in life. So that is relative poverty. Your subsistence needs are met, but you cannot provide yourself with the average standard of living. Your kid comes home from 3rd grade and wants a certain kind of tennis shoe because everybody at school has it and they're too expensive for you. It breaks your heart. You want to get it for him. Everybody has them, Mom. Well, not us, everybody. Or maybe your electricity is out a couple of days at the end of every month, or you have to go to a paycheck advance place in order to get money for the bills that you know are due, or you're down to your last piece of bologna and milk in the refrigerator, and you're just going to give it to your kids and go without for the next couple of days until your paycheck comes through. These are situations that describe relative poverty. Subsistence is met, average standard of living, average expectations, those are not met. Okay? Relative poverty is extremely common for the bottom 2 stair steps on our metaphor, the social ladder metaphor that we're using for the United States. One of them is called the underclass, and the next one above is called the working poor. And so when we get to our discussion about socioeconomic classes, we'll go into more depth about how do we define who are members of the underclass, who are members of the working poor. But those 2 rungs of the ladder, which roughly make up about 25% of the United States population, those 2 rungs of the ladder solidly experience relative poverty conditions during their lifetime, during their weekly, monthly life experiences on the micro scale. So, okay, it's an example that you will see in a video that I'm asking you to watch. We will have one video segment that you'll witness absolute poverty conditions. You have another video segment that you need to watch in preparation for you to be able to do well on your take-home project. And that second video is about a family in the poorest county in the United States, consistently the poorest, the most impoverished county in the United States since Emancipation and Reconstruction, Tallahatchie County, Mississippi. We are going to look at an part of an HBO documentary that shows one of the underclass families in the United States who exists in relative poverty. You will be able to make a comparison between the absolute poverty conditions you will see in the short video showcasing slum conditions in Liberia in Africa and you'll be able to look at Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, daily life and experience, and you'll have a visual to refer to for what is the definition of relative poverty, what is the definition of absolute poverty. Those are two of the things you have to evaluate on your take-home project. Okay, so again, like you did with absolute poverty, stop me now, rewind. I didn't write it. Oh, look, I didn't write anything on the board underneath relative poverty. You must have thorough notes because your take-home project allows you to have complete open book, complete open notes, and our textbook simply does not cover this kind of discussion in the depth that we're doing it right now. So you can't rely solely on your textbook to help you limp through this project. You need to read your textbook so you have a more thorough understanding, a different point of view than your humble sociology teacher is providing to you. But back this video up right now and fill in the blanks, fill in the gaps with the details of what we said about relative poverty. Make a comparison, like we did, between the definition of life chances and relative poverty. Go ahead and do that. Make that comparison in your notes right now, because those are some of the kinds of things that you're going to be asked to do on that take-home project. So the more thorough you are now, the more success and the easier you'll be able to breeze through the take-home project. I want you to be successful. So pause the video, back it up, take good notes. Okay, so let's talk about our last type of poverty that we are going to discuss today. I hope you all can see this well enough. The words here on the board are subjective poverty. So the word subjective, perhaps you are familiar with that already. Subjective is the opposite of objective. Objective things, you can back up and look at something from a wider point of view that includes a whole bunch of different perspectives other than your own. But subjective is very internalized. Subjective has to do with you or a particular individual's perception about something. So that word subjective in front of poverty is much more vague in terms of defining this type of poverty. It's much more vague because it depends upon the individual who is experiencing it. Perhaps there is an individual, well, first, let me say that subjective poverty is defined as a condition in which people thought that they would be farther ahead in life at the point where they are than they have gotten to that at that point in life. And so their expectations for where they would be and the reality of where they would be financially or economically, American dream attainment wise, the reality of where they are in life compared to where they thought they would be after the hard work and education that they put in, if there is a gap between that gap is subjective poverty. We can't be very specific about that gap, because there could be an individual who makes $150,000 a year. I do not make that in 3 years. I barely make that in 4 years, barely. So maybe there's a person who makes that in 1 year, but they have a house that is $500,000 of debt, and they have 4 car notes that are $1,200 a month, total, and then they have, student loans that they're paying for their kids, and they've got, credit card debt that's $35,000, and after all of the debt and the absolute necessary bills that they must pay each month, after all that is done, they don't have any left. And they thought, wait a minute, I thought going into this profession and having $150,000 a year, I should have extra money, that I'm not always worried about racking up more credit card debt, or I'm not doing all, that scenario that I'm describing, that is certainly not an impoverished scenario. That person has certainly created a situation in which their bills are in excess of what they're making in a month's time. But that person might think to him or herself, gosh, it sucks to be poor. I'll be so glad when I'm not poor anymore. Well, is that person poor according to relative poverty standards? Definitely not according to absolute poverty standards. Well, yes, they're poor. Don't make a judgment call. Yes, they are poor if, especially from a postmodernist perspective, they are poor if they thought they would have a different situation after they achieved the certain goals that they set out to achieve. They thought they would have a different financial situation, a different life experience than the one they have. So subjective poverty depends upon the individual. And somebody who is experiencing subjective poverty can have an excellent salary, like let's say $70,000 a year. That's an excellent salary. But if your bills outweigh what your income is, well, you're still going to, look at my air quotes, feel poor in comparison to what you thought $70,000 a year would feel like. Okay? So subjective poverty, this means that it has to do with the individual. It is not some kind of number that can be calculated with a long, ugly formula like the official poverty line. It's not something that can be evaluated simply by asking yourself, does this scenario describe somebody who isn't even meeting subsistence needs? Does this scenario describe somebody who is for sure meeting subsistence needs, but you would expect for them to be able to have their electricity on all month instead of 2 or 3 days without it each time between bills? Or is this describing somebody who, man, they should be doing fine, but maybe they have too many bills, or maybe their lifestyle is too over the top because they arranged for it to be that way because they thought they'd be able to afford it, but it turns out no, $70,000 doesn't go that far. So subjective poverty is extremely common among people in the United States. Relative poverty is also extremely common in the United States. Absolute poverty is not absent from the United States, but we sure do have a whole lot of social safety nets to try to prevent this. Worldwide, they're not so lucky. Okay, worldwide, they are not so lucky. So these 3 types of poverty, that and this concept of official poverty line and how we calculate poverty, and this word subsistence, this is a big one. Also that expanded explanation of life chances. Those are 4 or 5 of the significant issues that you're going to have to be able to combine your knowledge of these things into an explanation of life, analyzing a scenario or a description from a life experience of somebody and determining, are we talking about somebody whose life chances put them in absolute poverty, somebody whose life chances put them in relative poverty, or somebody whose life chances put them in subjective poverty. And this video gives you a lot of the meat on the bones that you need in order to be able to be successful on your take-home project. However, this does not include everything that you need to know, because we have to go past this chapter 7 stuff. Actually, I think we have to go into chapter 8 to read about subjective poverty, if I'm not mistaken. But we definitely have to go into chapter 8 to read about human development index issues. The World Bank that I mentioned with the $1.25 a day as being their threshold for absolute poverty conditions. The World Bank and the United Nations and other international watchdog and help groups look at social conditions worldwide and try to analyze ways to solve human problems like absolute poverty conditions, and they try to improve life chances for advancement and comfort. They're trying to improve opportunities for life advancement and comfort, that second part of life chances, in order to bring about an end to absolute poverty conditions. So we're going to have to look at that in chapter 8 when we have another lecture. But to complete this assignment, or to complete this lecture, you've got 2 more portions of videos to watch. Look in the announcement on Blackboard for the counter numbers. I've got 2 videos in my YouTube channel in the playlist that you'll have to find. I'll give you the link for them. But in your announcement on Blackboard, it also tells you what sections of those videos to watch. Because one of them is 15 or 16 minutes long and you only have to watch like 9 minutes of it. And another one is that's the HBO documentary. It's like an hour and a half long or something, but you only need to watch about 30 minutes of it. But you do need to watch these things because one of them is going to show you absolute poverty, and you're going to need to be able to see the lifestyle that is being shown so that you can internalize, what this definition means. It's not enough just to spit out a definition. That's a high school thing to do. No, I am not going to be impressed if all you can do is spit out a definition. You have to be able to evaluate things. You're in college, okay? You're in college and you have to be able to analyze situations and put your basic knowledge, like a definition, which is basic knowledge, into application, into analysis mode. Okay, and then you'll have that relative poverty. So these two things will be exemplified in the videos that you have to watch. So check Blackboard for those YouTube links, and then in Blackboard in the announcement it'll tell you where the counter is, 3 minutes, start 3 minutes in and go to like minute 12 or something. So look for that and you can fast forward to where you need to go and watch that, and we will talk about it in class on Tuesday of next week, so bring me your questions. Thanks.